Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to speak about Saturn retrograde in Pisces through the 12 houses. At first, I was thinking to do a Saturn-Neptune video together because they're both retrograde in Pisces. However, they're two distinct processes. They are coming together, and so they need to be understood in context of this larger cycle. However, they're 10 degrees apart. At the height of this retrograde, Saturn will be 15 degrees from Neptune. I use the Porphyry house system. We all will use whatever house system we use. However, unless you're using whole sign, there's a great likelihood that Saturn and Neptune are or will be in two different houses. So we really need to see that individual context. In the larger sense, we can't look at Saturn retrograde in Pisces without its deeper relationship to Neptune. There is a deeper, larger cycle that's culminating. All the Saturn work at looking at the structures and how we're defining and disciplining our time-space reality has to be understood in the context of there's something much more meaningful and transcendent of greater purpose, perhaps resonating with our deepest dreams, the most innocent, deepest part of our own being that wants to become crystallized and grounded in this world. In a sense, the approach of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction says we're preparing ourselves for a greater experience of meaning and depth in this life. But we need to do this foundational work of working with Saturn and Pisces. So what I'm going to be speaking to as I look through Saturn and Pisces retrograde through the houses are three essential points. One, facing the bleakness of our personal reality as simply being what it is, right? This is not what we want it to be, what we hoped it would be, what we expected it should be, but the somber acceptance of what it actually is. And this kind of brings us back to, this is where we are. This is the structural reality of my life. And then two, what am I going to do about it? This is the necessary maturation to put forth more effort to grow and participate in life. We accept greater self-responsibility to get to where we want to be. And in that sense, we're overcoming the Piscean atrophication, which happens when we're not involving ourselves, right? We're not putting forth effort and life just happens and we go wherever the winds take us. This is more about becoming a co-creator and consciously defining our time-space experience with greater purpose and direction. And three, the deconditioning of elusive structures that place value on form, on appearances, but are essentially empty in their content. Now, I often write articles in tandem to these videos, and I did so in this case. Usually my articles are kind of in a dance with the videos. Maybe the video comes first or the article comes first, and they kind of like build upon each other, and then I'll go back to one after doing the other and add to it. In this case, I wrote the article already, and it's long. I'm sort of giddy because this is like the biggest article I've ever written. I woke up in the middle of the night, maybe I couldn't even fall asleep, and I just had all the words and the thoughts running in my head, and I just began typing, and it became a lot longer and a lot more thorough than I anticipated. So if you would like to receive these teachings in your inbox, if you would like to see Saturn transiting through your house and read it, subscribe to my mailing list and you will get an email soon with this article on Saturn retrograde through the 12 houses. And as I share these teachings, I'm going to also just be referencing some of what I wrote to kind of elicit memory of some of these ideas. All right, and I'm going to timestamp this signature as well, so check out the description if you want to just jump to the relevant section. Before I start, a couple announcements. The Jeffrey Wolf Green Association of Evolutionary Astrologers has opened enrollment for the second online EA conference. This will be happening in October. Myself and I think 14 other astrologers, many veterans to this work, many veterans but are new to the conference will be coming, and we're going to have a couple new teachers that I'm very excited about. My brother Timothy Halloran, best teaching on medical astrology. Some really cool, fascinating talks. I'll be speaking about Venus and tending to the garden, the inner garden. So check that out in the description. And as always, I'm available for one-on-one sessions, soul-to-soul companionships for more long-term work with me. And I have a multitude of classes and courses and series available on my classes page. I'm going to be teaching a Planets That Square the Nodes class series soon, and you can sign up to attend the free introductory class that will be happening at the end of this month. All of that in the description below. All right, let's get started. Saturn Pisces retrograde in the first house. So first house is always about starting a new cycle. And in general, when you find Saturn transiting the first house, there's a freshness of energy, right? We're beginning a complete new cycle. There's a lot of ground, there's a lot of strengthening that is intended. And it says long term, where are you going? Where are you directing your will? What is the greater growth and development that you're beginning to take responsibility for? The thing is, in the first house, this direction isn't necessarily clarified or defined in the long term. So there's a refinement process that happens where we're sort of clarifying, what is it I'm saying yes to? What am I living for? What am I defending, protecting, fighting for? What is worth all of my time and my energy? Now, Saturn retrograde in Pisces in the first house can express in two general extremes. There can be a sort of existential guilt and confusion around the proper use of the will. Right? Oh, I don't want to take too much control. I don't want to get in the way. I don't want to control and direct the circumstances and the flow of things too much. Because that first house requires a sort of will and self-leadership. But Pisces, of course, wants to surrender and trust and allow. And so the confusion here can be in the proper use of personal will. What can happen is if we're not necessarily engaging and making clear choices and asserting boundaries in our life, we're going to find ourselves just sort of flowing with whatever happens. And then we're going to sort of build up perhaps a sense of frustration or anger because we're not honoring and respecting our time. There is a need with this signature to strengthen our conscious agency and use of time and space with higher meaning and purpose. But we're the only ones that can determine what is appropriate for our energy or not. Saying yes and going with any kind of circumstance, or not being willing to defend oneself or say, no, I'm not going here, I'm not doing this, or I'm not just going to flow into wherever my energy is moving in this moment, whatever impulses. The ability to say no essentially says I'm honoring and respecting that there's greater meaning and purpose, and I'm the only one responsible to create the conditions for that. So a lesson for Saturn in Pisces retrograde in general is there's a deep and important learning around boundaries. Boundaries become the way that we shape and create the space for something meaningful to actually ground itself in this world. Otherwise, it's totally diffusive and non-directed. So in this developmental process, you might find yourself really drawn to develop your strength, your skill, your speed, your agility. This might mean taking a martial arts class, starting to work out at the gym, building muscle. And all of these things are ways of developing and training our body and our mind to be present, to be aligned, to be focused. I'm strengthening, I'm building myself, I'm clear, I'm strong, I can do this. Then we don't feel overwhelmed by the ocean of life. We can recognize as a co-creator, which is an underlying learning for Saturn in all of these signatures. As a co-creator, it's my responsibility to become more of a vessel to strengthen myself. On the flip side, if there's just sort of this empty focus on form without content, right? Being strong, being powerful, being fast, this could easily be a sort of, this gives me a sense of meaning and direction, and so I'm just focusing on a lot of strength, on a lot of speed, on a lot of leadership, on a lot of agility, but without any direction or cause, right? This is where we can kind of get lost in the emptiness of form without content. The meaninglessness of a vessel that looks great but has nothing on the inside. So there also might be a deconditioning and a letting go of maybe where there's a lot of strength and power and speed and strength and stamina, but just for its own sake. Right? Saturn wants to say your life and what you're building is serving a much greater long-term purpose, and it's meaningful. It's what brings joy. It's what makes your life meaningful in the first place. Saturn in Pisces in the second house. Let's speak to two extremes. We can have, on the one hand, a situation of great opulence. Right? Pisces in the second house. You're swimming in an ocean of pleasure and sensation and luxury and money. You have everything that you need. But this can be a total distraction. You might be full of luxury and opulence, but feel deeply empty on the inside. So from that point of view, Saturn in Pisces retrograde will be simply bringing attention to what is the meaning of all of this, right? You might have all the things you need, but are you happy on the inside? Is life just about pleasure and survival for its own sake? So this can be a deeper introspection and reflectiveness around what is the true value and meaning of my life. And thus Saturn says, I need to simplify and let go and define and clarify what this life is for. What is the garden that I'm tending? What is really of essence here? From the other extreme, we can have a situation of not having what we need. This can be this extreme of struggling on a very root chakra grounding level, not having the basic resources to survive. And there can be a sort of naivety here, right? The issue is a sort of expecting, well, life is just going to work out. Of course life works out, right? You have the tree, the apples just grow on the tree. I have everything that I need. But this naivety can be a misplaced spiritual understanding. The truth is, yes, there is abundance, but when we're not putting forth the necessary effort to take responsibility for our own life and our livelihood and our own survival, we can't just expect a check to come from heaven to pay our rent. When there's an eviction notice on our door, we have to do something about it, right? So there can be a spiritual maturation here in recognizing, wow, the structural reality of my life is a struggle. I'm not where I need to be. This reminds me of all the different teachers and healers that I might work with in my practice who aren't where they want to be financially. And I think in the spiritual community in general, there can be a lot of resistance to, similar to the first house, like putting forth personal effort to define one's value and one's livelihood in an appropriate and useful way in life. But if we're growing a garden, we can't just sit at the garden and expect that everything is going to grow. The co-creative element is we're tending to the garden. We're defining the parameters of the garden. This is the field that I'm tending to. These are the seeds that I'm planting. And it takes conscientious and continual work, the quality of tenacity, persistence, showing up to tending to our garden, what we're developing, what we're creating, not just doing something once and expecting it all to work out. And the co-creative element within this is we don't make the fruit grow. We don't define what the fruit looks like. Everything that comes to us is sort of beyond our control, but we're creating the conditions for its manifestation. Another point to make about Saturn retrograde in Pisces in the second has to do with our sexual and sensual boundaries. Like on the one hand, there can be a sort of indiscriminate openness to pleasure, indulgence in any way, or just lacking in the healthy discernment around how to be in relationship to one's sexuality, right? And that can actually be a very distracting and difficult experience, right? Second house corresponds to self-esteem, self-value. And if we're not defining our value, the value of our life, the value of our body temple and what it's for and what we're cultivating, our garden, then we can easily get distracted in all kinds of indulgences or just having inappropriate or unhealthy boundaries in life. On the flip side, there can be a sort of like purity with Saturn in Pisces in the second of, not wanting to have anything, not wanting to experience pleasure, not wanting to be distracted, almost like the metaphor of a monk living in a monastery. That second house Pisces, it really holds that vibe of solitude and spiritual retreat and simplicity, not having a lot of things. So there can be a sort of spiritual guilt that we need to overcome and accept and allow what resources will make our life more livable, will allow us to live here and have the means to do the work that we're here to do. There can be very important lessons, spiritual lessons, in receiving. Once we recognize our deserving to receive, it's almost like I'm allowed to be in this body. I'm allowed to have a physical existence, so I can also really be this instrument and do the work that I'm here to do. It benefits everyone. I'll complete with one final thought. For many, this signature will be inspiring this deep draw within, right? To kind of simplify and retreat. As I mentioned, this signature does have a sort of hermit quality to it. So to value the life of inner solitude, this teaches us to become more reflective and quiet, to recognize what is truly valuable. and to learn to honor the emptiness that is really at the heart of all the things that we have and we do. So we can say, I have all these things, but what are they for, right? Or, I'm struggling with my basic physical sustenance, getting quiet and really connecting to the holiness and the sacredness of life. This comes from a quiet place where we're okay with ourselves right now. Right? We're not feverishly seeking to get more because we don't have, or we're not getting lost in all the things that we do have. There's a sort of quiet, self-responsible repose. And we learn that the richness that we're seeking isn't really about getting more or resolving the physical issues of our life, but in aligning more with the wealth that's on the inside. It always starts on that level, right? Our own self-value, our own knowing of the sacred in our own lives. In this sense, we are showing up for the few physical things that are in our domain of control and learning to live with more presence. So when I was thinking about Saturn and Pisces in the second house, the lyrics to Shimshai's song La Promesa came to mind. So I'm going to sing to you the English part of this. For when all we have is all we need, and the love of the Lord shall forever be, to do thy work and to live in peace, that the promise of heaven shall be with thee, that the promise of heaven shall be with thee. All right, Saturn in Pisces in the third house, moving retrograde. Imagine just scrolling through your phone, watching all the social media, reading the titles, looking at the pictures, gathering a lot of data and information about your world. And it's easy to just sort of live in this haze of mindlessly directing our mental attention in all kinds of ways that are kind of just meaningless. And we can talk about it, talk about the news, talk about the latest fads or trends or ideas, but not really have a greater, more significant, more intelligent, more well-informed sense of this world. And more significantly, we're not necessarily doing anything of meaning with our mind, right? So Saturn retrograde in Pisces speaks to, what is your mind for? What are you doing with it? How are you shaping and disciplining this amazing instrument for greater purpose and meaning? So there might be a need for boundaries relative to all the ways that we can be distracted. If we're studying something, if we're learning something, we need to apply effort. This again would be, heaven isn't going to just kind of reach its hand down and put some information in your head. Imagine being in school and the teacher asks you a question and you don't know how to answer it because the question itself is confusing, the premise of the question. And so there can be a sort of atrophication of the mind, feeling far behind, confused. I don't get it, I don't follow. All these astrologers are studying and practicing and all these students are growing and they're passing tests and this makes no sense to me. You have to put forth effort. This requires a conscious choice to direct our mental attention towards learning. What are your questions? What do you need to research? Where can you be directing your thoughts consciously in order to grow a greater framework of knowledge and understanding? On the flip side, there can be sort of the uselessness or the futility of seemingly impressive knowledge, right? Like you can speak about things that are happening politically or share all the news or the data and sound like you know a lot, but does it matter, right? You can gossip and talk about all these things that are really interesting and really devote a lot of time to it and maybe even seem to be well respected for all the things that you have to say, but does it feel good on the inside? I mean, this is seeking the content underneath the emptiness of the seemingly good-looking form. There can also be a sort of naivety with the signature, just accepting what's being told to you and not questioning it, right? Like you go online and you see a headline and you make an assumption. Most news media are kind of designed in that way. From like a Pisces third house point of view, there's an element of deception, which is what Pisces corresponds to. Pisces in the third house can be conveying ideas to deceive us in that these ideas or the gestures of communication are meant to kind of bring the mind to formulate certain conclusions about reality. But it's just some of the information, right? It's presenting it from a particular angle. It may not be false, but it may not be true. And it might be intentionally misleading. So there can be a lesson here in not being naive, not just accepting good sounding information or being so quick to be convinced. So the metaphor for this is you're going shopping and you see a product that says all natural, and you think, oh, good, all natural. I like natural, and it's all natural. This must be healthy. But if you look at the ingredients, you'll find a whole bunch of things that you can't even pronounce. What does all natural mean? Well, you can argue everything's natural. When you actually look at the nutritional facts, at the ingredients, it's actually gathering information, putting more effort to learn about your environment, researching legally, what does all natural mean? What can you legally call all natural? And again, as per Pisces Anywhere, there can be a sort of resistance to putting forth mental effort. We just want to accept things. We want to just flow with the current and not think. It's almost as if thinking or being critical or thoughtful or researching can feel like getting in the way of the flow. But then we realize we're going to get far behind. We're going to get lost. We won't follow in school. We'll be confused in our studies. We won't know how to discriminate or discern all of the information that we're being given. So this is strengthening our mind to be co-creators. And then we allow ourselves to become stronger as an instrument to understand more fully and more holistically the interconnectedness between many things. We might find ourselves developing a sort of strength and brilliance to explain higher spiritual concepts and ideas that are more accessible and digestible, and also the ability to logically piece together many different components of reality in a very grounded and concrete way, right? Do your research, source your facts, know where it's coming from, take your time, and the mind can become a very meaningful and useful instrument for learning, studying, communication, and the sharing of knowledge. Saturn retrograde in Pisces in the 4th house. So for this signature, I'm reminded of a quote from Mary Baker Eddy, which is, divine love always has met and always will meet every human need. I love that. Now, where that can get confusing is in this sort of naivety and the expectation that we're just going to be taken care of. This is like sitting on your kitchen floor, cold and hungry, and just waiting or hoping or expecting that something will come and nurture you and care for you. There can be an underlying issue of neglect where Saturn here is saying, take responsibility for tending to your own emotional reality. And this says, be that divine mother, father figure to care for yourself and those around you and your family, those that are within the field of care and nurturance and providing. So if you're in that kitchen, take the water, put it in the kettle, boil it, put it in a mug, take that blanket on that couch, sit down, get cozy, learn to provide for yourself. And this speaks to a very important lesson around emotional boundaries and self-care. There can be a sense of, well, I don't really want to take up too much space, or I don't want to assert too many boundaries, or I want to be available to take care of or nurture everyone else, but not me. So this issue of neglect might take overcoming some kind of guilt around being here. Like every child, every being in this world needs to be loved, needs to be held, needs to be cared for, needs to essentially know that they're wanted, and that there is a sense of dependability, that their deeper emotional needs are going to be honored and loved and cared for. If we know that about ourselves, we can really grow as an adult and know how to tend to our emotions. We can kind of work with, oh, I'm needing to get more rest. I'm needing to slow down. I'm needing to nurture. And we know how to self-care, right? And then we also know how to provide that for others. But there can be one of total neglect. So if we're in that place of sort of denying our own personal, human, tender reality, divine love can't meet us. And this is the journey of being a co-creator. Divine love meets and expresses through the intricacy of human experience. There's actually a dream that I had many years ago. I just recently remembered it. Let's see if I can remember the melody. Yeah, or I had a dream where I'm traveling through the world and I'm like witnessing all these different experiences and circumstances where it's like the underlying lesson is experiencing divine universal love through human connection, through human intimacy. And I woke up with like this deep devotion and beauty inside, and the song, these words just came out of my mouth like on its own. I think I even like shot up out of bed, and I immediately grabbed my guitar and just began singing it, or made it into a melody. And it goes like this. Last night I woke up with a prayer from my mouth. Dear God, show me all the ways that your love can express itself through human intimacy. Mm-hmm. Show me all the ways that your love can express itself through human intimacy. It's beautiful. So Saturn here, in terms of emotional boundaries, might say you can't feed the world and make sure everyone is doing okay if you yourself are not, right? A lot of times, and think of it as, how we learn as parents, we need to allow people to have their emotional experience. We can't protect people from feeling pain, from feeling emotions, and it's not neglect to be there for them. But when we are saving them or protecting them from every little emotional experience, we actually distract them from the necessary experience of human emotional discharge. So there might be this lesson of creating boundaries where we learn how to allow for a natural emotional experience, and for ourselves too. What are the ways in which we might be distracting ourselves from our own emotions, right? Emotional eating patterns, distracting ourselves, ways of escaping and avoiding feeling and being with our own experience. Another expression of the signature can be a sort of naivety in just assuming as a child, right, that we're always going to be cared for. Right? Anything that we're going through or feeling, something will come to save us and distract us from our own emotional experience, right? And so when that care doesn't show up, instead of providing for it ourselves through whatever means necessary, we'll fall into a sort of emotional despair, right? Like, oh, when, I just need to be hugged, I need to be fed, I need to be cared for, hoping, asking, complaining to some God or just some sense of the void of wanting to be taken care of and provided. And this really speaks to, we can't just expect life to make us feel better. We need to be that parent for ourselves and tend to our emotional reality. If we have a family, this is the same teaching, right? Like, there's a lesson here around tending to our responsibility to care and provide for ourselves and our children, our family, but with healthy boundaries. And this is a huge learning in discernment. And again, the co-creative element is, emotions move on their own. And when something's fully felt, it changes our identity. When we fully move through an emotional experience, we can know ourselves in a different way. Our perspective of the world changes and we feel more safe. We can actually hold more space for more complexity, more of what is, because we've allowed ourselves to fully experience our own emotions, right? Like, our depth of wisdom and insight and understanding of reality is in direct proportion to the extent to which we can actually fully have a complete experience and feeling. And so there's something around recognizing that the containers that we create in our life for healthy emotional maturation allows us to know who we are and to see our life in a much more safe spiritual term. Then we become a conduit for unconditional love and healing because we know how to nurture appropriate boundaries in our life. Lastly, from the point of view of sort of false materialism, we can have the appearance of, oh, I'm okay, everything is good, I come home, I have the dinner, there's always food on the table, my kids are great, we're loved, we give a lot of hugs, right? Like, everything looks good, but the question is there a richness of emotional intimacy? Is it just form without meaningful content? And that's where we can kind of be delusional or deluded about our reality, where everything looks good on paper, but we're actually depressed or lonely. So we have to listen to our feelings and really take responsibility and reflect upon, how can I bring more love and more care into my life so I can experience the greater truth of who I am, the greater meaning and holiness of the love that I am, and see life in that way as well. Saturn retrograde in Pisces in the 5th house. So I can see two expressions of naivety in the signature. One is a sort of expectancy that I'm going to walk out on the street and everyone's going to see my glory and my majesty and just worship me. Kind of like a king or a queen leaving their palace, and of course expecting everyone knows how special and meaningful and important I am. And then that being disillusioned when no one pays attention to you. No one sees me. I'm showing up, look at me, and no one seems to care. Right? So on that level, Saturn is saying, you can't just expect to be recognized or special. You're not special in the sense of any more than anyone else. Like the rest of us, you need to put forth effort. And the question becomes, what are the creative gifts and the deep inspiration that wants to move and flow through you that you need to tend to and take responsibility for? It requires work. You can't just rest on your laurels, right? In a sense, we can poetically say Saturn doesn't reward a lack of effort. So this can be bringing sort of a deeper reflectiveness upon, what do I want to birth in this life? What creative potential do I have? How can I take greater responsibility for its development? Now, the other expression can be a sort of like feeling very small and insignificant. Like no one sees me. I'm not special. I'm not important. Maybe I don't even want to take up space. Like this existential issue of taking up space and hogging the attention. And that might be a very common Piscean guilt of sort of reconciling with like the fact of my human existence. And, this Piscean guilt is often sort of this more Judeo-Christian struggle with how do I reconcile with the imperfection and the smallness of my being relative to something that's so much greater than who I am, right? Like, who am I to take center stage? So we can be reflecting everyone's light, giving to everyone else, making everyone feel like $1,000,000, but, yeah, me, sure. Oh, yeah, I wrote that, or I drew that. That's my song. Yeah, it's not that important. But be brilliant, right? So this is calling for us to have some confidence and courage and entitlement to say, I'm here. And God's love, higher meaning and purpose wants to act through me to inspire the world. I have to know the gem and the beauty that is unique to this vehicle, this particular conduit of meaning. And I have to take responsibility for it. Otherwise, life can feel very empty and void of meaning. And this is where, we can have the expression of maybe you are famous, maybe you are doing good things and everyone loves you, but then that greater question is like, are you expressing what's in your heart? Are you expressing what's in your soul? Are you inspired? Are you really connecting with that stream of love and inspiration that really wants to come through you? Or is it more just like, it looks good and everyone likes it, but it's empty for you on the inside? Or you're like reflecting everyone's light. Everyone feels great around you. But are you happy? That's the question. Saturn wants you to take responsibility for your joy, for your happiness, for experiencing a deeper dimension of purpose and creative engagement and aliveness in life. Regarding children, this can also be a calling to pay attention to your own children. Right? Pisces in the 5th house can either be the neglect of our children, right? Not seeing their actual reality, either ignoring it or just sort of delusionally making them what they're not. Oh, you're going to be a great Harvard professor. But like, who are they actually? In the same way, we can have that experience with Pisces in the 5th. Very commonly, maybe we're as children, we weren't seen for who we were. So we're like a brilliant artist and like no one's noticing kind of thing. So be it our own children or our inner child, it's calling you to actually show up. What is a creative development to actually take responsibility for that only you can cultivate? And this is where boundaries come in, right? Because on the other level, it's like Pisces in the 5th house is playful, innocent, and exciting. This can get lost in either, if we're not being defined, right, not connecting to our draw for greater play and joy and meaning, or just being endlessly youthful and innocent and not actually maturing, like always romantic, always having a good time, always going to the party, but not creating necessary boundaries to give our life more direction and meaning. It's not about the ecstatic, joyful experience. It's about structuring a life in the long term that allows for the sharing and the experience of that which is deeper and more beautiful and the sharing of that joy with the world. Saturn in Pisces retrograde in the 6th house. So an interesting thing with 6th house Pisces, we're looking at the polarity of Virgo and the 6th house. This can often point to a sort of confusion between spirit and flesh. What do I put effort towards? What do I fix versus what do I just allow to be as it is? Very commonly, we hear of Pisces in the 6th house as sort of like undiagnosable medical issues. But more broadly, this can just reflect crisis and messes in our life that we don't seem to have the ability to get to the bottom of and fix. So on the one hand, there can be a deep sense of overwhelm. right? Feeling burdened and weighed down by the clutter, the crisis of one's life, one's health, one's body, one's physical reality. From that angle, Saturn retrograde says you got to put forth more effort. Right? You can't just like brush your teeth once, pray to God to have good teeth, eat sugar, and feel disillusioned when you get a cavity. There are ways of tending to every day all the details of our physical reality and improving it to get stronger, to get more healthy, but then we let go of control. There's like a humility in the signature. We can't control all of the details and make it so that nothing ever bad happens, no crisis ever takes place. This is about training and disciplining our minds to cultivate the humility of just showing up to do what we can and surrendering the rest. This is how we allow ourselves to become an apprentice to spirit, recognizing that every facet of our life is an opportunity for refinement and healing, but it requires boundaries. It requires conscientious effort. Like the existential guilt and confusion here can be, well, I shouldn't have to put effort. Right? All healing comes from something non-physical anyway. Why do I need to be focusing on the body? And this is the co-creative element. If we become too focused on this perfectionism, making sure all the conditions are just right, that does become a sort of emptiness. We can get lost in this sort of empty routine of constantly maintaining our health and our physical environment, making sure we get no germs, that we never get any sickness, right? Everything's always organized. But that's a way of escaping and kind of procrastinating and avoiding what's really important. The over-concern and over-emphasis on details and perfectionism for its own sake, it becomes that empty form without meaningful content. So Saturn retrograde says, what is it that you're here for anyway? What is it that you're here to do? And this is the point. We tend to our physical reality not to make it all perfect, but to honor and to be fully in participation of our physical existence, to give meaning to our life. We're all here to serve a purpose. There's work for each one of us to do. And oftentimes in this sixth house, we're training and developing and apprenticing and cultivating our skills relative to the work that we're here to do, but we're also doing the work that we need to do the work that we're needing to do. We're laying the ground. We're setting the stage for the temple, for the environment that allows for everything to flow in an easy way. The extent to which we are not giving attention to what is for us to do, that we're neglecting or procrastinating our work. Let's say you're a healer and you're not, making yourself available, or you're training, but you're just not really showing up for class or doing your training work, or you have writing projects or things that you're working on, or a business, or you're a doctor, whatever areas of our life that we're needing to show up for, and these areas are simply the ones that are calling your attention. These areas will be the ones that are simply dysfunctional. Like the more we neglect it, the more dysfunctional it becomes. And this is where we might be procrastinating and sort of subtly avoiding that, because to actually embrace it means we have to recognize we're going to be imperfect. We're not going to do the best job. We're not going to do it perfectly. We can't wait for some kind of ideal spiritual purity to make it good all the time. So where there is a crisis is where that crisis sort of has the breadcrumbs to point to the cause of that crisis. Like all crises are caused as the result of neglect. So Saturn retrograde in Pisces says tend to whatever neglect there might be in your life. And if there isn't neglect, begin to recognize the signs of it. And this could be a very stark reality of like, you got to take care of your health. You got to take care of the details of your life. Things aren't going to get better on their own. There's also a dimension here, just think about the natural square, archetypal square between the sixth house and the third house, right? Of eliminating a lot of clutter and distractions. There are many ways that we might be avoiding our work and expressing this procrastination by way of just endlessly distracting ourselves with all kinds of things that will keep us from what we're actually needing to do, right? It's like, instead of making that video or responding to those emails or, creating a structure to actually deal with the things that are on our plate, just avoiding it and doing other things just to keep our mind off of it. there's a stark reality of we're not going to get anywhere if we don't apply our effort and embrace some limitations. So this wants to bring greater and more refined agency and self-discipline and self-responsibility in tending to our routines, right? Our practices. This is like your own personal daily practices, your health routines, the things you're doing for work, every part of your life that requires maintenance. Show up for it and clarify, what is it I'm doing this for? What is the meaning of my life? And that's, just to come back to that spiritual question around, why put effort towards things? If I'm sick, why do I have to do things for my body? Because healing doesn't come from a physical, all these things, right? We each have to take the steps that are accessible and necessary for us according to where we're at. If we neglect it but continue to stay in a place of dysfunction, we miss the point. And the key is to recognize we're all going to do the best that we can, but we're focusing on giving meaning and purpose to our life and the work that we get to do. This is about karma yoga. This is about serving a purpose and getting beyond ourselves. So if it means following a certain diet or experimenting with it, if it means changing your health routine or beginning to look at some details that you may have been neglecting because you didn't want to look at those details, embrace it. Sometimes we find ourselves for a time walking a very particular path with physical parameters and limits just to teach us that it's really not about the physical part, right? It's not about the right way to live, the right way to eat, the right way to diet. So then be open to how you can embrace adjustments in your life to serve your own growth and your strengthening of yourself as an instrument at this time. Whatever it might be, with no judgment. That relinquishing all judgment, all perfectionism, all spiritual idealism, so that you can really get back on track with whatever is holy and meaningful that you get to be nurturing and serving in this life. 7th house. So we can have two polarized expressions here to give one example. A person that's just sort of waiting for the right relationship or for the right person to come into their life and just be the best listener and save them and get them and see them and be able to, love them in the way that they've been longing to be loved. And we can have a person that is delusionally playing that role. Right? I'm going to be everything for you and maybe everything for everyone, to love you and to give and give and give. So this is fundamentally an issue around boundaries and discernment. In the former case, there's this naive expectation that someone's going to just give us all that we need. But relationships don't work that way. What happens when we come from that place is we're going to meet people and project onto them, are you my savior? Are you the love of my life? Are you the person I've been looking for? Or just in all kinds of inappropriate ways, make people what they're not because of an unmet need that we're projecting on the outside. Relationships are practical, they're realistic, all the different kinds of relationships. They're about two people being in conscious agreement, conscious relation, conscious conversation, communication, and listening. What do you need? What do I need? What do you want? What's our expectation? What are we agreeing upon? And that may or may not fit our illusions or projections of what we want others to be or who we want ourselves to be. Saturn is getting realistic about our relationship. So love and unconditional love can thrive when we let go of our illusions, albeit there might be some disappointment. If we find ourselves sort of in that savior role, trying to, be giving and unconditionally loving, we will easily override our own boundaries. We might be disillusioned when people don't give back to us, or when people aren't taking the advice or integrating all that we're giving and actually taking care of themselves, when people become overly dependent upon ourselves. In general, one of the issues with Pisces in the 7th can be where we fall into our relationships, into these polarized places that go unchecked. Like two people can be in relationship, be it romantic, business, whatever, for years, but not actually understand or be conscious of who the other person is and what their actual needs and realities are. We might just be projecting these, you be this and I be this. This is the role or the fairy tale that we're playing out without questioning it. So unspoken and naive expectations are placed upon ourselves and one another. And then we're disillusioned or upset or angry or abandoned or betrayed or rejected, right? Hurt when others don't conform who we've decided they are supposed to be. Or we might feel compromised or martyring ourselves if we're always trying to conform to who others are wanting us to be. Many souls with Pisces in the 7th house will be counselors or healers, where their spiritual service in life is listening to other people, right? And there can be this gift of when people are with you, you have this ability to hold this wide open space of really unconditionally loving and accepting another person just as they are. And that's great. And this can be really healing if there are appropriate boundaries, because all relationships are benefited and grounded when each person is showing up in their own self-responsibility and conscientiousness. If it's just text me whenever you want, even though I'm your healer or your therapist, 2:00 a.m., I'll answer your phone call. That's an inappropriate boundary that doesn't actually allow for healing. When we degrade our own boundaries and become inappropriately available for other people, no one really heals, right? On the flip side, this can be an amazing opportunity to clarify and strengthen the container of your role and your purpose in life. The key is to see other people in their wholeness as unconditionally loving through the lens of unconditional love, where each interaction is fundamentally a shared healing. And so the boundaries respect that you're not saving anyone, and that they're okay and that you're okay. And so entering into a relationship where there's that underlying sense of, I'm not going to do the work for you, and I'm only going to meet what is in alignment within the container of our agreement, right? That allows each person to do their work, and the clarity and the maturity with which we're able to see one another brings healing to everyone. So the giving of miracles through forgiveness, through unconditional love is, I love you just as you are, and I'm refusing to join you in your illusion. I'm refusing to get myself confused and becoming the thing that I think you need me to be or you think I need to be. So we stay clear, and that's where the miracles of healing can really become available. The other issue here, from the point of view of the Saturn form without any kind of content or meaning, we can have a relationship that looks good. We hold hands, we go on dates, we dance together, all the different things, right? Or a business relationship, just any kind of relationship where the roles are being played out. But the issue is, on the inside, there's a real lack of connection. There's a lack of intimacy. So there might be a need to communicate and listen. How do you feel? How do I feel? And that Saturn says, stay here, stay present. Listen to what is. Don't try to project some other kind of reality. That's the place from which all true growth can actually prosper. Saturn retrograde in Pisces in the 8th house. Pisces in the 8th house is a very strong signature for a yearning. There can be an underlying desire to experience something of greater depth and meaning and purpose in this life. For many souls, this is sort of this desire to transcend or eliminate or let go of the worldly complexity. All the entanglements, confusions, the addictions that we get stuck in for indefinite periods of time. On the deepest spiritual level, this signature is about returning and reconnecting with the eternity of the soul itself. On this soul journey, this is often going to express by way of the lessons of dealing with impermanence, right? Yearning for something of greater meaning, a deeper connection, getting it, losing it. There's always this evolutionary process with Pisces in the 8th house of being brought back to our soul and not attaching to anything in this ephemeral reality that constantly comes and goes. So Saturn wants us to be thorough. Saturn really wants us to take a look at our addictions, our escapism. This can express in two ways. If we find ourselves in a state of addiction, this can be to an intimate relationship, a deep sexual or emotional bond, someone that we're just attached to, whether we're with them or whether we're holding on to the past, getting stuck in a sense of abandonment or betrayal or loss. Or it can be this non-ending yearning to be met in a way that we're just constantly outside of ourselves in this desire nature. Or we can find ourselves in these sort of indefinite experiences of being stuck or entrapped in an experience where we're not in touch with our power. Right? This can be a relationship where we're sort of at the control of another person's will, their desire nature, and we're not in touch with our own agency. This can also be this pattern of getting involved and merging with people or experiences where we get deeply distracted from our own core, from our own center. So Saturn here wants us to look deeply at all the psychologically disempowering addictions and patterns and dynamics that might be keeping us from our essential agency. In taking responsibility for that, there's a development of psychological self-knowledge. And this is the draw here. Many souls might be drawn to really begin to create some discipline and practice or training with respect to a deeper level of psychological self-knowledge on a soul level. And this could be any kind of psychological work, spiritual psychology, soul astrology, hypnosis, anything that takes us into the unconscious realm so we can uncover and unravel, why am I doing this? What is it I'm really looking for? Why am I in these patterns? What's really going on underneath the surface? Many souls with this signature might be manifesting in the role of a soul worker, right? Doing work where their service is to go into the deepest, darkest places and help people to come back to the light, right? Working on a very deep level. In this case, similar to Pisces in the 7th, there would be a need to be clear about boundaries. There can be this sort of innocent desire to be in unity. Right? This can happen if you're a healer. This can happen in an intimate relationship. In any facet of our life where there's a lack of boundaries and discernment for how close to get, right? The merging, seeing people in their suffering or in their addictions or in their deep pains, and almost like joining with them to kind of alleviate them from their suffering. The issue here is we might end up lowering our vibration, kind of stepping outside of our agency in order to join others in their suffering. And we can easily get sucked into their darkness, their psychological dynamics, and kind of join them in addictions and confusion. So there's often this need to clarify and strengthen and clear our own vibration, to be in clear alignment. And this way, by being in service to other souls and meeting some of the deepest, darkest, hardest places of this human experience, but maintaining a center in our eternal nature, we really allow others to also clean up their act. Like, this is all about psychological empowerment, but being very clear and solid within our own selves. Another point about relationships, this can often point to a sort of letting go of the body, of the form, of the sort of temporal attachments, and focusing on the inherent unity of the soul, but not of the body. Doing so requires a sort of spiritual maturity to recognize that there is no true identification with that which comes and goes. The eternal can only unite with the eternal. So for many, this might be this awakening to a sort of spiritual unity and an evolution in that regard. But this also might mean a letting go of other forms that simply don't serve anymore. There might be a grief, but that grief itself is sort of an elevation to a deeper level of consciousness. We can only really unite with another when we're not holding them or possessing them in the temporal, ephemeral qualities of their being. From the perspective of Saturn corresponding to the emptiness of form with no meaningful content, here this might highlight things like depth of connection, power, powerful, sex, wealth, control, being able to influence others or events with your own inner psychic or psychological power, getting the things that you want, right? All the ways in which we can manipulate or control life experience. And all the ways in which that might be otherwise totally accessible, especially all the different forms of addiction or escapism. There might be a sense of, I feel powerful, but I'm just depending on my ability to manipulate or control the outer reality. This is, again, the example of, on the inside, do I really feel power? Do I really feel a connection to my eternal soul? Or am I just riding this wave of control? On a deeper level, this wants to be a lesson in manifestation, right? Because Pisces in the 8th house, like, the universe is quite big, the soul is really powerful, we can kind of get whatever we want. Like, if we concentrate, if there's a deep enough desire in nature, anything can come into manifestation. The issue is, everything that comes into manifestation can be like any dream, any illusion, but it's just a sandcastle. Like, we can concentrate and envision all kinds of things, But if it's not aligned with our own evolutionary work, if it's not actually leading to spiritual growth and realization, it just gets washed away, right? It's not going to deeply fulfill us, and we're actually just going to be seeking more and more and more and more. So there's a wisdom here in being able to understand with some sense of responsibility and maturity, what do I want to call in? And to call that in with a recognition that everything that comes is going to be a part of my learning. It's going to be a part of my schooling. I'm going to grow. I'm going to mature. I'm going to join with it. But then there will be a time where I will also let it go. If we appreciate that, we can be full in and meet our desires, manifest deep experiences. But this happens because we're not outside of ourselves. We're willing to be fully present, to be fully committed, but then to also let go when it's time. And I think that's a really deep teaching of Saturn moving through this house and sign. Saturn retrograde in Pisces in the 9th house. So this signature can reflect a deep openness and trust of life, that this world is a ground for ongoing, deeper spiritual realization. And so there can be this draw and this openness and being inspired by all the different teachings and paths and experiences that provide illumination and a deepening of insight. The key with this signature is, are we actually learning something? Are we actually deepening our own direct knowledge of reality? And there are two expressions that I want to highlight here. There can be a naivety in just, being attracted to the shininess of, the teacher or the path or the practice or the medicine or the peak experience, and be in a sort of ongoing place of restlessness and even potentially just believing whatever we're told to be true. This world is so vast and there's so much to know. It's like, wow, there's so much to learn. There's so much to know. What does this all mean? What's this all about? This openness and awe and wonder of reality and learning and spiritual realization can easily become a point of lacking in discrimination, where we just accept whatever people tell us, any kind of crazy theory or belief system. And so this really highlights the difference, and we're called upon to take responsibility to actually cultivate knowledge. Beliefs are rooted in external guidance. We hear something from the outside and we accept it as true. Or we have an experience and we tell ourselves, oh, I understand what this means. I figured it all out. We can easily be convincing ourselves of something. Versus knowledge, it's known. I've often given this example that knowledge is the taste of orange juice. It's clear, it's known, it's unrefutable. So the other expression here, besides for the innocent and the openness, can be a sort of lack of direction, like futility, like, it's too big anyway, I can't ever really know it, so I'm not going to try. I'm not going to really develop and strengthen my own knowledge and understanding of reality. There's too much hypocrisy. I've been naive and trusting, and I was disillusioned by all these teachers that I gave my faith to, right? So Saturn says you have to take responsibility. Yeah, maybe you were disillusioned. Maybe you had blind faith and you were confused. But we need to take it upon ourselves to cultivate the discipline and the limits and the boundaries in our life to nurture our own realization. It's like heaven isn't going to come down and just plop some insights in our head. Well, it could. I guess you could have a peak experience, but it's just that. And there's a great difference between an experience and something that we're actually digesting and assimilating in our own lives. I had this experience once of walking through a parking lot, I think it was of a church, and a pastor said to me, it was of a church, and she said to me something like, it's easy to get there if you know where you're going. And this reminds me of Pisces in the 9th house. Where are you going? What's the point? What are you trying to do? What's the point of life? This is a journey that we need to take responsibility for. Now, this can really bring us into a deep clarification process with teachers and students. With teachers, we can't just accept what people are telling us, right? Like, as a student, there needs to be an active, engaging, discerning, why am I doing this? What's this practice for? Not just following something on blind faith. If we're just a part of a tradition or doing something, it might look very spiritual, right? You can be part of a spiritual practice or a monastery or an ashram or a church or whatever, and it might look really good, But again, from the point of view of like Saturn having the emptiness and it's like just a form with nothing on the inside, is it actually taking you anywhere? Or are you just repeating ideas of like what this is supposed to be, but not actually learning anything? From the point of view of the teacher, we know that once we really begin teaching, that's when we often will deepen and truly integrate our own learnings. And this is because to teach, we're getting beyond just the abstract fact of knowledge or understanding, and we're living it. We're actually applying it and using it in a way that can truly serve other people in their own unique realization. It sort of takes us to a new level of wisdom and compassion. So the key with Pisces 9th house, Saturn retrograde, is to be responsible as a teacher. Don't give answers that can't be digested. Don't try to save people by being like the one that has all the wisdom and the knowledge or can do really cool things or like really insightful and really impressive and sort of take people from their journey. But inspire people to give them back their journey. With Pisces in the 9th house, when something becomes too concrete, it falls into the belief system, right? And we stop learning because we already have the answer. Our minds decided. So there's a great responsibility as a teacher. I've shared this story many times, but most of you haven't heard it. I was once in this group, and this man was doing this beautiful work and like working with each person and connecting with his own guidance, and knew exactly what to say in the most relevant way for each person on their own soul journey. He was deeply attuned, deeply intuitive. And I asked him, what's your spiritual practice? Like, what's your practice? Because from a very innocent place, I'm seeing this man who is reflecting to me a sort of intuitive state of inspiration and knowledge and wisdom that I guess I wanted as well. Like it reflected something that I know is inside of me. And what he said really was helpful. Some of the best words anyone's ever told me. He said, my spiritual practice is my spiritual practice. Your spiritual practice is your spiritual practice. Man, best words anyone's ever spoken to me. It so liberated me. It was helpful. And I would say I've walked so many paths and have encountered so many teachers where there's so much certainty. Like, this is the way. This is the way. Even though we know there are many paths, it's still so easy to look at another person and to project our own journey of realization and to put it onto the student. Another dimension here in terms of this calling to get one's act together, there is a need for limitation, right? So like the 9th house journey this is a pilgrimage. This is a journey of realization, and whatever your goals are, your aspirations are, you're not there yet. We can easily get ahead of ourselves, right? Like have some kind of spiritual realization or vision, or just take it out of spirituality and just something more concrete. I mean, it's all spirituality, essentially. You know, a business idea, some sort of, class you want to teach. There's a lot of walking to do from where you are to the manifestation of this vision and this potential for something greater. Like, I figured out how I'm going to make more money. But that's going to take applying these practices and these principles in life and not just being optimistic about it. You actually got to do it. And if we become overly opportunistic about it, we'll go too far. And we won't be connected to our guidance and our intuition. So there is a need to work within time. What am I doing every day to lead me towards these greater potentials that I know are possible for me? And again, if we're a student, if we're studying, if we're practicing or training in something, you will get there. This is a time to really commit yourself and maybe let some other things that are somewhat distracting in your life go, so you can really fully allow yourself to receive this journey. One final point I'll share is there can be this yearning for a teacher. It's like, I want someone to come and show me and guide me. And this really says we can't be looking on the outside for some kind of authority figure to come in and tell us what to do. I mean, for all of these placements, like the authority of Saturn, the grounded structural reality that will make things better, it doesn't happen when we just like hope and yearn for it or pray for it. We have to do the work ourselves. And that saying as it goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. And the student is ready because they're not looking for something on the outside to tell them what to do. We have to take responsibility to look at our life. Like, am I getting where I want to go? Is this working for me? What can I do to hasten the journey and take it more seriously? Saturn retrograde in Pisces in the 10th house. This signature very much highlights the Saturn issues around boundaries and judgments and working out our relationship to moralities. 10th house is about the structural reality of our lives, the roles and the responsibilities that we're playing in society. This does highlight the question, is the structural reality of my life meaningful? Is it really who I want to be? Am I living the life that connects me to something of greater meaning, or am I just kind of going through the motions? So when it comes to issues around boundaries, there are two expressions that I'll highlight. Let's say you're a boss and the people that work for you are late, but you don't want to be like the mean kind of boss and like, scold them, so you don't say anything. Like, oh yeah, you're a little late. Let's say you're a teacher and you catch some of your students failing. Oh, we've all made mistakes. I don't want to embarrass them or punish them or give them consequences. I'm a parent and, oh, I want my children to be free. I'm free children. I don't want all those rules and those strict boundaries. And this can be very dangerous, right? In all of these examples, the structural reality falls apart. There's anarchy. If we're not upholding good boundaries, let's take the other end of that. If we're living in a world where we're sort of defined by the judgments and the rules of these arbitrary boundaries and roles, that's kind of keeping us suppressed, it means we've become overly conditioned, we've become overly defined by structure, and we forgot what point it has in the first place. Structure and form is meant to serve love. It's meant to serve something of greater meaning and value in our lives. And so there can be a sense of smallness where we're just being weighed down by the heaviness of worldly responsibilities. I gotta make money, I gotta get up, I gotta do my thing. So the question is, what really inspires you? Like, what is the kind of life that you really want to be living? It's not that we're small and incapable of doing anything, but this is something I've been highlighting in my recent videos. There's often this huge gap between, those that are creating the rules and social power that kind of are creating the structures of our lives, and then everyone else that has to follow it. The workers, the ones that are sort of subject to what the people in social authority are establishing. To actually become a co-creator means not just being passive and going along with the world that's being handed you. It takes discipline and work. If you want to start your own business, you have to strengthen and raise your own vibration. As per Saturn lacking boundaries, I don't want to try hard, or I don't want to, I don't want to advertise, I don't want to have to drive, because that's going to, I'll run over bugs. Our innocence and our purity, or not wanting to cause any harm, also will kind of keep us weighed down by some decisions that other people are making, right? To actually become a conduit and bring into this world a higher meaning, a greater love, to allow the structures of our life to actually serve something that's helpful for society, where we're showing up in a way where we're doing good work that feels right within, requires actually building our own vibration, putting in the effort to create that over time. The co-creative element here is we put in the effort. We have to be willing to work within the parameters of the world and engage. In the same way that, we're paying taxes, we stop at red lights. If we want to achieve something, we have to work within the existing parameters of our society to whatever way that's needed. Have the things that we need to have, be able to function or have the credentials or be able to walk through the doors that are necessary to achieve what we want to achieve. And that might take training. That might take time. There could be a lot of value with this signature, similar to what I spoke about with Saturn in the first house in Pisces, of really focusing our attention on things that will really strengthen us, right? Kind of suddenly becoming a lot more professional, focusing on how you're presenting yourself to the world, going in directions that maybe otherwise were very worldly, that you judge, that you never wanted to be a part of, getting really good at business stuff, things that, writing email copies or setting up nonprofits or gaining subscribers, like things that you would otherwise feel like, oh, I don't want to do too much. I don't want to put too much of my ego forward. And these are important things to be able to learn. And it takes discipline. It takes understanding that if we're not willing to engage in the world, we're simply not going to get to where we want to. On the flip side, there can be a sort of anarchistic, nothing matters kind of attitude, right? And this is like total negligence and a disregard to all boundaries. I'll cross the street when I want to. I don't need to pay the bills. Money is an illusion anyway. And this attitude really keeps us behind in life. Like it keeps us kind of struggling on a root chakra level. And a part of the psychology is the refusal to grow up. I definitely recommend some of my recent videos on this Saturn-Neptune dynamic in general, because this can be a big issue for many souls, especially if it's manifesting in the 10th house. Children, from a 10th house point of view, don't need to worry about being responsible. They don't have a lot of worldly responsibilities. So they can be innocent. They can actually push boundaries a lot because they know their parents ideally will be there to protect them and kind of guide them. But if we're not maturing, we'll just sort of stay in that Peter Pan innocence, not wanting to be limited or defined. This is because the spirit, like the infinity of that Pisces, might feel too big, too infinite for the gross limitations of all those 10th house boundaries. But we have to appreciate and be humble about our limitations. We actually won't be able to experience the expansiveness of spirit if we're not defining and creating limits and structure for our time-space experience with meaning and purpose. If we don't embrace boundaries, we actually will be very defined and very stuck, because we're always going to be struggling with boundaries. We're always going to be struggling with getting things done, getting things on time, working on that basic level. The boundaries and the ways that we define our reality allow for sort of ease, for higher meaning and purpose to infuse itself into our worldly lives. And that's the higher point of this signature. Another dimension to point out is where there can be a sort of martyrdom in always wanting to do good. You know, setting up nonprofit, volunteering, being everyone's parent, like being so involved in the world where you're busy 24/7, deep sense of responsibility. There can be a deep sense of depletion. I mean, that can lead to a point where you're like, too much responsibility, I gotta hide, I need to take a vacation, but you may not know how to take a vacation. Often this is fueled by a deeper existential guilt, or a sense of, I need to keep busy, I need to keep on doing things because I'm atoning for a deep sense of having sinned. Like maybe I did something wrong and I haven't really healed or forgiven myself from that. So I gotta keep on making sure I'm doing good things. And so like if I can sacrifice myself enough, I'll feel better about myself, right? So if we're depriving ourselves and depleting ourselves, the question is, are we really helping? Right? Is it truly helping the world? On the other side, there can be a sort of despair. Right? The world is full of corrupt and unethical people. What difference do I make? I'm just a small pawn and I have really no control or power. In both cases, the answer is reconciling with the fact that we can neither take on a full sense of responsibility nor free ourselves from the responsibility to simply do our work. There's a saying in Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our forefathers. It's a Jewish text that says, Lo alecha amlecha ligmor v'lo ata ben charin hivatel mimena. It is not for you to complete the work, but you're not free to be exempt from it. Right? Play your role. In this way, you become an instrument for maximal healing, but don't martyr yourself. Right? There's a difference between, I need to make sure everything in this world is okay because it's never going to be, versus I'm embracing the function that I'm here to play and I'm accepting everything else as it is. I know that in playing my role, it's all a part of the greater plan for healing. And in general, this signature, and I've spoken a lot about this in my recent videos, there's just really deep learnings around letting go of judgment. We can't be the judge of other people just as much as we can't be holding ourselves to these totally unrealistic moral standards. There's an ambiguity to being an adult. And as we mature spiritually, we make decisions, and maybe in our innocence, we never wanted to go there. We never wanted to have to, face like the complexities of doing what we do and the environmental or social consequences of having a phone, right? There was a time in my life where I was like, I never want a phone, never want to own a car, But as I've matured, I've embraced, these things are helpful relative to the world I'm living in. And it's tender, it's complex, really. But the thing that, for me, what I'm continually learning here is there's a sort of forgiveness in accepting there's no perfection in time and space, but what's the role that I'm here to play? How can I serve? How can I help? How can I structure my life and create boundaries to be of greatest benefit? And that allows all of the parts, all of the pieces to come together for the greater good in God's timing, not in my own. One more thing to say about this signature in the 10th house. I recently listened to a video of a guy I follow on YouTube where he talked about how he got to the place that he is now in the success and the growth of his channel. It's currently at 500,000 people. 3 years ago, he started with 0 subscribers. And he said when he began this channel, he researched the YouTube stats and he decided, according to the data, that he would stick to a fixed schedule, work with the instruments and the recording devices and the content that he had, and just keep on going, start where he is, and improve from there. It took him a while. I think like for the first year, there was hardly any growth. Then he got to the first 100 subscribers, which is a really big deal for him. And in time, it grew massively, and he's just wildly successful now. And the teaching that I take from that relative to the signature is success didn't come overnight. Maybe there was a short period of time where things grew really quickly, but he put in a lot of work. And this is the co-creative element of Saturn in Pisces, right? This retrograde is really inviting us to think about what more effort can I put into my own professional or career development or my responsibilities or conditioning the kind of life or world that I want to live in. We have to put forth the effort. And nothing happens unless we are putting forth that effort. It's like if you create a YouTube channel and you just make a couple videos and you're like, oh, no one's watching me, this is too hard, I'm not going to make it. You're not going to get anywhere. So grace comes in. This is the part that we have no control over, right? Grace comes in and meets us, and we can become wildly successful. But it's only because our efforts created the space to allow and to invite that to happen in the first place. Saturn retrograde in Pisces in the 11th house. So there are 2 expressions that I want to highlight with Pisces in the 11th. One can be a sort of naive openness and universality to all people, all humans. We're all going to get along. We all treat each other well. And this egalitarian nature that wants everyone to be included, wants to be as inclusive and accommodating and accepting as possible. Because that Pisces ideal of unity applied to all these different groups, the diversity of human beings, and wanting everyone to feel like we are all a part of it. And there could be a deep compassion and care and sensitivity to those that are underprivileged, those sects of society that maybe are less supported, that need more care, need more guidance, wanting to really raise everyone up. And this could be like a universal friend. I'm just there for everyone. That's one extreme. The other is a sort of misanthropic, sort of like disillusioned, humans are lost state of mind. This could be as a result of being completely disillusioned from that deep innocence and naivety and just trusting people. We do horrible things, humanity is lost, right? So Saturn retrograde comes along, and the deeper self-reflection is, what kind of world do I want to create? And if I'm looking on the outside and disillusioned, I can just sort of get stuck there. See, 11th house expressions in general can manifest in 2 ways. We're either in some kind of community, we have our friends or groups or our circles, many of them, or there can be this really strong sense of I'm just walking alone and I'm a community of one. No one gets me, I'm kind of doing my own thing. I can be very conspiratorial or just like very avant-garde or kind of out of the box. The key point of reflection is, what kind of world do I want to live in? And thus, how can I embrace and strengthen and clarify my own vibration? I want people to join me. Here's a great idea, a new political party, a new movement, but no one's interested in, right? Doing everything you can to include everyone, but it's just not getting any kind of traction because there's an innocence there. Saturn requires work. For example, if you want to start a new political party, how do you do that? Like legally, how do you actually create a political party? And what kind of groundwork on the feet, right? In the communities to just kind of bring more and more people into it. Fundamentally, there needs to be a sort of quality of detachment and objectivity and non-personalness in order for anything new to happen in this world. If we're swept in this sort of idealistic thinking, we're going to be very dissuaded and disheartened when no one's interested in. If we understand that oftentimes, as per the 11th house, we need to be a community of one, holding this greater spiritual ideal for humanity that is more forgiving, more inclusive, more loving, and just continuing to do the work to build community, to establish a network. What's interesting about the 11th house, we have the idea of an ecosystem. And an ecosystem thrives when all of the different elements of the ecosystem are, being what they are. They're not being interrupted. However, an ecosystem comes together gradually in time. I don't know enough about this to say it, but I'll give the general idea. I was once taught a little bit about the stages that a forest might go through, right? So after a forest burns, like there's nothing there, there's going to be the initial growth. That initial growth, even if it's really short, will invite a sort of environment where certain bugs and species can then thrive. That, works the soil, and eventually it leads to new species coming in, birds, whatever, that will carry seeds that will then bring larger trees and whatever. And this perpetuates to create an even greater and greater and greater holistic complexity that is totally self-emergent. But it starts really, to bring this back to our own experience, it starts with our own vibration. Being what you are and doing the work to manifest that in your own life definitely, absolutely creates the environment where an ecosystem naturally and organically on its own, according to how the intelligent design of creation works, to actually come into fruition. Another issue here can be one of conformity. So you can be a part of your group, a part of whatever circle of friends or communities in your life, which, expresses in many, many areas for most of us. And to be true to ourselves might mean facing the possibility of judgment. I'm going to walk my walk and be who I am, even if people don't get it. And just think about how this is manifesting in the world right now. There's a lot of calling people out, right? These are the right views. This is the right way to be a human being. If you're pro this, you're bad. If you're, and that's wrong. If you're against this, that's wrong. You shouldn't be. And literally, talk to one person. They might be really into the thing that you think is absolutely important. And of course you should be into that. How could he not be into that? But really not into the other thing that you also think is really important. We all have our own little angles. And I think Saturn retrograde in the 11th house, Pisces, is sort of shattering all these moralities that keep us separate from one another. There needs to be the ability to honor and respect one another, even in our differences, without being like, and you're an outcast now, or you can't be a part of this. So to be who we are, to not be afraid of being different, it always allows that in its own flow, the right vibrations, the people will come together as it's meant to be. So we never need to worry about where do I belong? And this is another dimension here. If you want to be a part of certain communities or have certain kinds of friends, yes, be your own vibration, but it's not just be your own vibration when you're opening the refrigerator and grabbing the milk. It's following the affinities within your own soul, right? If you're into astrology, join an astrology group, take a class. If you're into science, start, watching more science videos, comment on the channel, to get involved according to your own inspiration, not because you're trying to get in, but because you want to have that experience. And that will lead more and more to being involved in community. There's an interesting thing where certain people are often seen as these people are the avant-garde leaders of this movement, or, these are the people that are doing these cool new things. But if it's just about status and being the cool person, the one that everyone is I want to be more like that person, or they're the leaders of the new edge, it's totally empty. And it becomes its own conditioning that then needs to be liberated from. So the maturity and the discipline that's developed with Saturn retrograde here is to be true to our own vibration and develop a path of resonance with what we want to be experiencing as a human being, whether it's people that we're involved in or the things that we want to create in this world. Another issue here can be relative to this egalitarian nature. I don't want to leave anyone behind. Right? I want everyone to be included. Oftentimes, there's a need to just let people be where they are. Right? Not everyone has to belong in a physical sense. Everyone belongs in an essential sense. But you don't have to make everyone feel included all the time, because then a Saturn issue sets in, right? If everyone belongs in every way all the time, that isn't always going to work depending on the circumstance. There are needs for boundaries. There are needs for rules, for regulations, for sort of guidelines in any kind of group or community, whether they're explicitly stated, if it's like an organization, or just naturally, intuitively understood. So there might be some discrimination and boundaries around just letting things be as they are. And this comes back to you, right? If other people aren't including you, like, I want to be a part of this. Don't worry about trying to find belonging. Like that Pisces dynamic can feel like everyone has their thing and I'm on the outskirts and I don't know how to get in. I feel so small and weak. Don't worry about that. Follow your affinity. Get involved from a place of agency and self-responsibility. Don't come from a place of seeing yourself as an outsider. Saturn retrograde in Pisces in the 12th house. So this again really does highlight that sense of like, what's this world all about? And there can be a bleakness in the sense of it's really about nothing. It has no inherent meaning other than the meaning that we're giving it. We can wake up day to day and live our life, go to our job, whatever it is we're doing, whether it looks important or not important. And that greater 12th house question is, where's the meaning? Where's the deeper spiritual value? So I want to give an example. We can say in general, Saturn in Pisces in the 12th house really emphasizes devoting your time and space experience as a discipline with respect to spiritual realization. It's wanting to live a life deeply immersed in connecting with the spiritual truth, that which is universal and timeless. Just as much as it can be a sort of like, I'm connecting with nothing and what's the point of all of this? So in this example, imagine you're living in a monastery and all of the Saturn dimensions are very exact, they're very defined. There's a lot of definition, structure, schedule. You wake up at 4 o'clock to meditate, you shower, you do your practices, you eat, you walk, you meditate, you eat, you rest, you meditate, you do your walking meditation, Dharma lecture, teaching, meditation, go to sleep. Like your whole life can be immersed in this sort of rigid structure that on the one hand is so beautiful because it's all this time to be in contemplation and sort of aligning your consciousness, getting in touch with the infinite, with the universal. And it's letting the world go, letting everything else go and just focusing on what is essentially true beyond the physical world that we see. On the other hand, this can be deeply depressing and boring. If there is no personal spiritual meaning, all of these structures and forms just become their own repressive boundary. If we're not living and actually surrendering to something of greater meaning and value, it's just emptiness. And this is where that Saturn expression of the form without anything meaningful, it really brings up that reflection. Whatever life we're living, what's the purpose of it? How are we devoting our time and space experience for something of greater meaning and value beyond this world? And if our boundaries are too tight, there might be a need to loosen it. There might be a need to relax the judgment or the rigidity, like the right way to be. I have to meditate and wake up and follow these practices and do all these things right. Well, what if you're too stuck? Your consciousness is too bound, too limited by these rules. There might be a journey of forgiveness here, of loosening up a little bit. On the other hand, if there's too much looseness, a lot of souls with a signature will feel like, I'm not getting anywhere. I wake up in the morning, I don't have any purpose or direction, I just kind of scroll on my phone, and I'll just go wherever life takes me. Like there's no navigation. Pisces, 12th house, I'm just flowing with it all. And so without the structure or the definition or the boundaries, there's no discernment, and whatever happens is what happens. And it's very easy in this state to fall into all kinds of escapism and addictions where we're not really engaging consciously, defining our life with greater meaning and purpose. So this can really induce this deep reflectiveness. I'm not getting anywhere with life. There's no meaning. This is void. I want to commit and connect with something of greater purpose beyond myself, beyond my own making. So a lot of souls during this time will find themselves joining more fundamentalist or orthodox forms of religion because it's guidance. I can surrender to this and it tells me what to do. It's infusing my life with that meaning. I'm going to join that monastery where every part of my day is defined for holy purposes, right? So we can just have these two extremes, and it's really not about what we're doing with our time, but the meaning that we give it, which means we have to walk our walk, whatever that looks like. There's such a deep ongoing teaching with all of these signatures in letting go of our judgments, our moralities, or our naive ideas of like what a good spiritual life is. Saturn in the signature can really have a hard time with asserting boundaries because that underlying Piscean 12th house, I don't want to get in the way, right? In the lack of boundaries, it can be, I'm letting others walk on me, I'm letting life walk on me, or I'm just like, I'm not regulating any of my own behaviors, I'm not disciplined, and so I have no control over my own life. This signature can really reflect this strong dichotomy, the duality between like total anarchy and directionless, like meaninglessness, and a very rigid, conservative, spiritual control situation, right? And the way that we're all navigating that is really just reflective of where we're at on this journey and how we're learning the proper and right use of boundaries. So another facet to this is, being that this is closing a cycle, approaching the first house, many of us will find that on the one hand, we're bringing a whole cycle of development to a close, right? If we've built things, we've been doing things, establishing structures, if it feels empty or meaningless, if we're not really connecting with it on a deeper level, it might be time to let it go, to let it move on to the next phase. Or on the other hand, in order to bring our works to completion, we have to be willing to completely succeed, completely see it through. Many souls during this phase will be really called to step forward, to give all of the gifts, all of the discipline, all of the work that they've been cultivating, and share it with the world. So it can be brought out, so all the fruits can be shared, so you can release it and completely move on. This is a common misunderstanding with Saturn transiting in the 12th house. Like, you might often hear about it as depressing, going within. It's a really good time for meditation and retreat and things like that. But more often than not, it's actually a really important time. Yes, the introspection is very deep with this signature, but oftentimes we're actually being called to step more fully into the world to bring our works to completion. Similar to what I was saying with Pisces in the 10th house, there can be this like allergy to boundaries, to asserting boundaries and definition and saying, I don't want to take too much control. I don't want to get my ego too involved. But we need to be able to do that. We need to be able to actively be in the world sometimes to do the work that we're here to do. It's really not for us to judge. This is all about letting go of judgment. This requires our active co-creation within time and space to get anything done. Spirit will use us as an instrument for its purposes, right? This might actually have a result in bringing forward a very large influence in the world. Like, our works can kind of be taken in a way where it's used according to love's plan, right? Maybe we're invisible, maybe it's quiet, or maybe it becomes very big. That's the point. We're just humbly doing what we need to do. If there's something that needs to be done, we will do it. Show up, take responsibility for it. The effects of that and where that goes in the world, if we become famous and important, or if no one notices, that doesn't matter. It's about fundamentally, and this is the catchline of this whole series, the boundaries and the conscious definition that we lovingly and thoughtfully assert and affirm in our own lives become the placeholder and the ground through which spirit and love and meaning can actually enter and work through us, with us, in our lives, on behalf of something much greater than our own understanding. All right. This completes Saturn retrograde in Pisces through the houses. If you've made it this far and you're watching it at this point, thank you so much for watching. If you feel this was helpful, please be invited to share it with a friend as well.